and do not necessarily reflect the views and opinions of FRC Media, Bristol Community College, or the City of Fall River.
Well, hello. Welcome to Spindle City Straight Talk. I'm Chip.
And I'm CJ.
And it's Monday in the Riv. And for you on YouTube, we're live. For you at 5 o'clock, hello. Well, Fall River had its first murder.
I don't know if we should go hooray or, oh my God, here we go again.
Well,
here we go again.
I mean, unfortunately, this is what it was a murder. It was a stabbing. I guess the individual bled to death, bled out. Wasn't a shooting. So, apparently the last week or so, we've had a few stabbings in the city. So,
yeah, the interesting part about this stabbing was he actually drove his car after being stabbed.
Yep.
And when he lost consciousness and caused a car accident. So the police department got a phone call for a car accident. And when they got there, they found a guy who's bleeding out. So.
Yeah, and it calls to question what was going. Obviously there's some issues here. We saw they do have a suspect for all you people. They had a picture on Channel 10 and I believe Channel 12 also of the suspect. Fall River police have put out so if you see the suspect, apparently they said he also has ties to Halifax. We're assuming, which we should never assume, that's Halifax, Mass, not Halifax, Canada. But, it calls into question what happened. He said they had an altercation at a party or something like that.
Right.
And why didn't the people at the party, try to stop the bleeding, call 911? Maybe the party was a party they didn't want the police and 911.
That's right.
So, these whole things talk about the pervasive, culture that's beginning to grow in Fall River. And so, hey, that's the beginning, but we've got to get to something. We've got to correct something. We like to be as accurate as possible. CJ didn't correct me, and, once in a while, he should have. I guess last Wednesday's program, when I was going over my border tirade and I was reading off the stats, I said 1918 rather than 2018 for one of the stats. Probably deja vu. I was thinking of the First World War, which was a far less. It was far more straightforward than what's going on today. Yeah, obviously it was 2018. Everybody should have known that. But I apologize for sometimes when you read, your brain gets ahead of your lips, and that's the way it is. But we have some issues here. We talk about. Let's go to our little. We had an opinion here. I see an opinion here. The opinion of some individual. Fall River City Manager pushes a City Council power grab. Goes on to talk. We're recalling the mayor. If you want to see the limits of democracy tested, follow Fall River politics. Well, I disagree with the opening statement because I don't think there's any limit to democracy. Democracy is when the people are allowed to speak, and whether you agree or disagree, that's not a limit. It's they have a right, and I disagree with the. I disagree with this concept. It's a power grab. I think it's just the opposite. It's a reduction in power in politics because when we have a city manager, and we know that Worcester, because he goes on to talk about East Providence changed over. They talked about longer mayoral terms. That's more power for one individual.
And we've done those things already.
And we've done those things. They failed. And we've seen the kind of abuse of power one individual as a mayor can do. We've seen all these hirings that Jazel Correa has done, making ice house guards in charge of DCM, having a revolving door, having a chief of staff, even though he really doesn't need one, all these political jobs. When you have a city manager in Worcester, and most towns have a town manager, it's a far more fiscally conservative and fiscally better for the taxpayer than it is having a mayor. A mayor, one individual having a king so to speak, is a power grab, and the power resting in one individual is wrong. So I disagree. He goes over, it's like, as I said, figures can lie, liars can figure. He talks about, change in mayoral terms. I believe we should, for the head of my way, I'd have an election every year so we could get them out as quickly as possible. But unfortunately, the people won't do that. So I just have to make that comment on that. I disagree. He has a right to his opinion, but I don't believe it's a power grab. The reality is that we have a far better chance. Number one, the city manager is not an elected official.
Correct. He's hired by the city council.
He's hired. We have a far greater ability to control the makeup of the city council than we do a mayor. Because the mayor, with the politics and the big money behind them and running head to head, we've got 9 city councils, and I read I read the flush, and you're right. Having things like ward councilors, which make it not 8 people from the north end on the city council, right. Look, the Type B charter has worked wonderfully in Worcester for decades and decades. If you read most state laws, every state law begins all cities and towns except Worcester.
And Boston.
And Boston. Well, Boston had, that's not even, that's a completely separate nation. They have even their fire department, where 350 cities and towns have the same civil service requirements and stuff for fire entrance exams, and Boston has its own, because Boston has all the money, all the power. Boston's separate, but I'm talking about not the capital and the hotbed of politics. But to me, an e-charter...
Opinion was written by Mike Silvia from the Fall River Reporter. So I'm going to, at least say who wrote the opinion. But my problem with this whole issue is City Councilor Steve Camara can be quoted as saying that if this takes effect, the new mayor will get $60,000 a year. In Worcester, the new mayor only gets $10,000, and it is the city council president who's the ceremonious mayor, and he's the one with the most votes during the election.
Yeah. Well, remember, he's taking care of his political friends, and the reality is, actually, that's a pay reduction, because years ago, the Worcester mayor, when they first used to get ceremonial mayor, used to get $20,000.
Yeah. So
it's a ceremonial position. It's like the greatest word we have, stipend.
Yep.
Stipend. So, and look, it is more power with the people. It's not a power grab by the council, because let's face it, what's the 8th and 9th people on the council get for votes? Couple thousand?
Yep.
High 2,000s, near 3,000. So it's pretty easy to control. It's far easier to control the makeup of a city council than it is to make up the guy that's in the seat. Because once you start giving away favors, we've seen it happen in politics all the time. When power rests with a few individuals, we lose democracy. And how many times have we told people that we have a constitutional monarchy, that you have to vote these people out? And with that segue, CJ, I really don't like to read laws and boring stuff and things like this, but somebody sent me this column, and it's an older column. I guess this guy's been retired for a few years. But it is one of the most on the money columns I've ever read, and it's called Charley Reese's Final Column. And this is what it says. A very interesting column, completely neutral. Be sure to read the poem at the end. I'll let you read that poem, and because it's really funny, and it's tragic too. Charley Reese's final column for the Orlando Sentinel. He has been a journalist for 49 years, and he's retiring, and this is his last column. This is about as clear and easy to understand as it can be. The article below is completely neutral, neither anti-Republican or Democrat. Charley Reese, a retired reporter for the Orlando Sentinel, has hit the nail directly on the head, defining clearly who it is that in the final analysis must assume a responsibility for the judgments made and the impact each one of us has every day. It's short but a good read, worth the time, worth remembering. The title of the column is 545 versus 300 million people. Politicians are the only people in the world who create problems and then campaign against them. Have you ever wondered if both Democrats and Republicans are against deficits? Why do we have deficits? Have you ever wondered if all politicians are against inflation and high taxes? Why do we have inflation and high taxes? You and I don't propose a federal budget, the president does. You and I don't have the constitutional authority to vote on appropriations. The House of Representatives does. You and I don't write the tax code. Congress does. You and I don't set fiscal policy. Congress does. You and I don't control monetary policy. The Federal Reserve Bank does. 100 senators, 435 congressmen, 1 president, and 9 Supreme Court justices equates to 545 human beings out of 300 million. And they are directly, legally, morally, and individually responsible for the domestic problems that plague this country. I exclude the members of the Federal Reserve Board because that problem was created by the Congress in 1913. Congress delegated its constitutional duty to provide a sound currency to a federally chartered but private central bank. I exclude all the special interests and lobbyists for a sound reason. They have no legal authority. They have no ability to coerce a senator, a congressman, or a president to do one cotton-picking thing. I don't care if they offer a politician $1 million in cash. The politician has the power to accept or reject it. No matter what the lobbyist promises, it is the legislator's responsibility to determine how he votes. Those 545 human beings spend much of their time and energy convincing you that what they did is not their fault. They cooperate in this common con regardless of power.
Party.
I'm sorry, a party. What am I doing here?
It's on the back.
No. Oh, it's on the back. I'm looking for the second page. What separates a politician from a normal human being is an excessive amount of gall. No normal human being would have the gall of a speaker who stood up and criticized the president for creating deficits. The president can only propose a budget. He cannot force the Congress to accept it. The Constitution, which is the supreme law of the land, gives sole responsibility to the House of Representatives for originating and approving appropriations and taxes. Who is the Speaker of the House? He is the leader of the majority party. He and fellow House members, not the president, can approve any budget they want. If the president vetoes it, they can pass it over his veto if they agree to. The House has passed a budget, but the Senate has not approved the budget in over 3 years. The president's proposed budgets have gotten almost unanimous rejection in the Senate in that time. And this is a few years old, so that's not recent, but it can be done. It seems inconceivable to me that a nation of 300 million cannot replace 545 people who stand convicted by present facts of incompetence and irresponsibility. I can't think of a single domestic problem that is not traceable directly to those 545 people. When you fully grasp the plain truth that 545 people exercise the power of the federal government, then it must follow that what exists is what they want to exist. If the tax code is unfair, it's because they want it unfair. If the budget is in the red, it's because they want it in the red. If the Army and the Marines are in Iraq and Afghanistan, it's because they want them in Iraq and Afghanistan. If they do not receive Social Security but are on an elite retirement plan not available to the people, it's because they want it that way. There are no insoluble government problems. Do not let these 545 people shift the blame to bureaucrats whom they hire and whose jobs they can abolish, to lobbyists whose gifts and advice they can reject, to regulators to whom they give the power to regulate and from whom they can take this power. Above all, do not let them con you into the belief that there exists disembodied mythical forces like the economy, inflation, or politics that prevent them from doing what they take an oath to do. Those 545 people, and they alone, are responsible, and they alone have the power. They and they alone should be held accountable by the people who are their bosses, provided the voters have the gumption to manage their own employees. We should vote all of them out of office and clean up their mess. Charley Reese is a former columnist of the Orlando Sentinel newspaper. What you do with this article now is, and what you have read, is up to you. 45 versus 300 million people tax list. And it starts out with the heading, "This might be funny if it weren't so true."
Be sure to read all the way to the end.
That's right.
Taxes land, taxes bed. Tax the table at which he's fed. Taxes tractor, taxes mule. Teach him taxes as are the rule. Taxes work, taxes pay. He works for peanuts anyway. Taxes cow, taxes goat. Taxes pants, taxes coat. Taxes ties, taxes shirt. Taxes work, taxes dirt. Taxes tobacco, taxes drink. Tax him if he tries to think. Taxes cigars, taxes beers. If he cries, taxes tears. Taxes car, taxes gas. Find other ways to tax his ass. Tax all he has, then let him know that you won't be done till he has no dough. When he screams and hollers, then tax him some more. Tax him till he's gone good and sore. Then tax his coffin, tax his grave, tax the sod in which he is laid. Put these words upon his tomb. Taxes drove me to my doom. When he's gone, do not relax. It's time to apply the inheritance tax. Accounts receivable tax, building permit tax, CDL license tax, cigarette tax, corporate income tax, dog license tax, excise tax, federal income tax, federal unemployment tax, fishing license tax, food license tax, fuel permit tax, gasoline tax, currently 44.75 cents per gallon, gross receipts tax, hunting license tax, inheritance tax, inventory tax, IRS interest charges, IRS penalties, taxes on top of taxes, liquor tax, luxury tax, marriage license tax, Medicare tax, personal property tax, real estate tax, service charge tax, Social Security tax, road usage tax, recreational vehicle tax, sales tax, school tax, state income tax, state unemployment tax, telephone federal excise tax, telephone federal universal service fee tax, telephone federal state and local surcharge tax, telephone minimum usage surcharge tax, telephone recurring and non-recurring charges tax, telephone state and local tax, telephone usage charge tax, utility taxes, vehicle license registration tax, vehicle sales tax, watercraft registration tax, well permit tax, and workers' compensation tax. Still think that it's funny? Now, one of these taxes existed 100 years ago, and our nation was the most prosperous in the world. We had absolutely no national debt and had the largest middle class in the world, and mom stayed home to raise the kids. What in the heck happened? Can you spell politicians? I hope this goes around the U.S. at least 545 times. You can help get it there. Go ahead. Be an American. Send this to everyone you know.
There you go. I'll tell you what, it took a little time to get through all those taxes, but I'll tell you, it just goes to show. And, and when we got to the end, that was the best one I ever, you see a lot of telephone tax, but the tax, telephone reoccurring and non-reoccurring charge, that means they're just taxing you because something's either reoccurring or non-reoccurring.
That's right.
So that means it's just a tax. So, and they even had the audacity to name it that. In other words, anybody who doesn't bother reading it, read it. It just means they're just throwing a tax on, because you've already got a minimum usage surcharge tax. You know,
He forgot a tax, though.
and a usage charge tax. But now we've got reoccurring and non-reoccurring. Well, I hate to tell you, but everything is either reoccurring or non-reoccurring.
He forgot a tax, though.
Yeah.
The 911 access tax.
Oh, yeah, that's right. That was like probably after he retired.
Right. And the funny thing is that 911 in Rhode Island, that 911 tax goes into the Rhode Island General Fund. It doesn't even go to maintain the 911 system.
And, you know,
And I wonder what happens in Massachusetts with that tax.
the reason that, you know, I felt really obligated, you know, I hate to read to people because it's hard after a while, because
Right.
you get ahead of yourself, because I've read this, I don't know how many times already, because, you know, 545 people, but it's really Congress. It's really the House. And he's right. How can you have any of these problems if both parties are against them? Both parties are against everything when it's politically expedient, and he's right. The only way we can control this government is by making this a revolving door. I had this conversation with somebody actually yesterday, a person who's involved in politics, and I said, you know, when we begin to throw people out, when we impose, because they won't allow us to impose term limits, when we impose a voter-created term limit where everybody gets 2 terms and they're gone. And his counter to that was, well, you're only going to get the same thing. Or, you know, you just get a different person but with the same. And I said, well, I disagree. We may get that on the short term because obviously these people get these jobs. And I heard today Mark Monroe-Dion was making fun of all the mayoral candidates, saying it's a good gig. He might get it too for $100 grand. You know, but if we begin if we send a message to people who hold political office that this is not a career, this is not something you spend your life doing, sucking off the public dole like an embedded tick, and you just stay there until you die and fall off the corpse, they won't run anymore. They won't run anymore. It may take 2, 3, 4 elections. But once they find out they can't make a career out of it, only people who truly have an interest in public service, in my opinion, will run. And if you remember correctly, that's what this country was founded on. We had people who were farmers, who were printers, who were tradesmen, who put down their tools, who put the horses in the barn, and they picked up a musket, and they fought against the British to establish this nation. And when they prevailed, they went back to their jobs. Some went into public office. George Washington, Thomas Jefferson. The list is endless. But did they stay there forever? No. They served, and then they went back into private life, just as they did when we had the Minutemen. Citizen soldiers, citizen politicians. That's when we had no taxes. That's when we had the strongest and best middle class in the world. As this article said, 100 years ago, none of these taxes existed. And just like our school department, just like our city, taxes, deficits have risen to astronomical rates. With all the new taxes, things get worse, not better. Our middle class is evaporating. Our school system can't make the top 100, even though we got CFOs and deans of students, and now the superintendent wants to hire some more supervisors to oversee things. And what do we get? More tax bills. And like they said, they'll tax us till you're in the grave, and then they'll give you the death tax, the inheritance tax, and a whole bunch of. There's only one way to stop this, people, and Charley Reese was right. And Charley, that's one of the best articles I've ever read. One of the most accurate articles ever, because it's true. And as we've said here long before I read this article, if Congress, and he mentions it in this article, if Congress had our health care, they'd fixed health care. If Congress had, if their retirement system was being attacked like ours are because of fiscal imprudence on the parts of cities and states and the federal government, they would fix it. But nothing hurts them. They're bulletproof, and they stay there for life. And they shouldn't. Charley Reese was right. Kudos, Charlie.
It's always interesting when you've got columns like that. I mean, that was his last column.
Yep.
You know, he retired after 49 years in journalism. But it's interesting when they point these facts out to you because people don't believe them.
Yeah. Well, yeah, when we say them, they're lies. We're just
Right.
making it up. And we've said virtually all of this in one form or another, especially the thing about how many times have I said stick them in a 3-decker,
Yep.
give them our health care. But, you know, he hits it right on the head, and he makes it, you know, he makes it so clear. Like he said, if both parties are in favor, they're against deficits, why do we have a deficit?
And you know, that's the big problem. And I mean, look at what's happening in Massachusetts. They're finally dropping and they dropped it by what, 0.1%?
Yeah, like we're going to notice that one.
Yeah, like you're really going to notice it. When the people have been saying set it back to 5% for the longest time, you want to send a message? Have a citizens initiative petition and set it back to 3% or 2%. And let's see what they do with that. Because they're already talking about the fact that they have millions of dollars in excess money, which means excess money, free cash, is taxation.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you know what they'll do if you get a citizens initiative? They'll do the same thing that they do in cities and towns. They keep the chiefs of staffs and all the fat jobs and all the political hack jobs, and they go, oh, there go our police and firefighters. You're going to burn to death. You're going to get murdered in the streets. You're going to, you know, the school teachers are out the door. Everybody that provides a service that you, the taxpayer, they're obligated to give to, that's what they attack first, and nobody ever holds them to task. There should be, as you know, Charley Reese said, there should be a recall election for virtually all of these people, although, you know, we can't get rid of the Supreme Court justices until we change the rule that gives them lifetime appointments. And, you know, but that has to be done. Just as one of our judges in Massachusetts, you know, when we tried to have them elected, what did they go? They ruled against it. Oh, you can't do that. You have to have a constitutional convention. So anytime you try to take power, and that's why I've said time and time again, if you don't believe that this is a constitutional monarchy, read this article. CJ, you know, could you post this on our page so people can read this thing?
I guess we could.
Yeah, I think it'd be good. I think it should get some traction. And, you know, because government does what it wants. Now, Gina's wants to sell pot in Rhode Island. Let's get them all high and let them kill people on the road.
Well, that's
because there's no consequences. As long as the government can make money on it, they don't care. It's like cigarettes. It kills more people than opioids. But they'll never outlaw them. They'll tax them and continue to tax them, and
Maybe
people will still buy them.
Maybe that's what we should do with opioids. Maybe we should start taxing them.
Exactly, exactly. You know,
But, you know, Ramondo's doing that because Connecticut's going with legalized marijuana.
Massachusetts.
New York, Massachusetts. Everyone around is going, and she's like, we're being left out. And
they're being left out of the money pot. And as I said, there's never a consideration with government about the damage it causes. So I wonder if they could prosecute her if somebody gets high on marijuana and runs somebody down.
Well, that's the other issue. There's no way to test for it.
I know. Well, everybody,
at this point in time, anyhow.
Stay angry, and all I can tell you is, remember Charley Reese, 545 versus 300 million.
We'll see you on Wednesday. Have a great day.